So, okay, what about strengths? There's sometimes an idea that some people are strong, you know, particularly when we're talking about inner strengths, and other people are challenged. And I really like the idea that if you go weightlifting, you tend to increase strength, but also through practice, inner strengths increase. Now, there's one way of doing this, and I'm going to invite you to do this, is just think of a time where something happened that you did that made a difference. I just want you to just think, is this okay? This is one of those memory recall times. Just do this now. You're thinking of a time where you did something that made a difference to a situation, that was perhaps part of a turnaround in a situation, and it either was a turnaround in you or it was a turnaround in others. You did something that improved a situation. Just want you to think about that. And now also say, well, okay, what strengths in you helped you do that? What strengths in you helped you do that? Now, talking about our strengths and things we've done, it may sound like blowing your own trumpet, but if you want to become a good trumpet player, you need to blow. And so I'd like to invite you now just to turn to somebody next to you and tell them, and you're going to take it in turns, and I'll just call time after about a minute because this is a brief intervention favoured by the health service. I'm just going to call time after a minute. I just want you to say, okay, a time where I did something that made a difference was, and just tell that in very short, you know, headlines and news headlines, something I did that made a difference was, and then a strength I recognise in myself that helped me do that was. Just see if you do that. Just turning to somebody next to you. I'm going to call time and I'm going to ask you to swap over. Hello? Hello? I'm going to ask you to come to a close on that conversation. I'm going to ask you to bring your story into landing, and I'm going to ask you to swap over. If you can thank your listener in any way that was appropriate, thank your listener, and now swap over. So the person who was listening more is now describing a situation where they made a difference, where you did something that made a difference, and a strength that helped that happen. So swapping over. Okay, now, I don't know how many people here do sports, but if you do sports, you do a thing called training. If you do play the trumpet and you like blowing your own trumpet, you practice. And it's the same way in terms of building resilience, that resilience grows with practice. And particularly, if you can identify the strengths that are uniquely yours, and you look for new opportunities to practice using them, that's been one of the research-proven interventions for improving mood. But also what happens is you change the story about yourself. Now, I talked earlier about this idea of your story of resilience. And I think the thing about stories is you have characterization of the main star, and you are the main star of the story of your lives. And you'll have a kind of a characterization of yourself. You know, Chris he's the sort of person who, he can do this kind of thing and he can do that kind of thing. But there'll be certain situations that you'll see as beyond you. That's beyond my power. That's beyond what I can cope with. I can cope with that, I can cope with that, but if that happened, that's beyond what I can cope with. And I love this idea that if something seems beyond your power, see yourself as on an adventure of finding your power. And the wonderful thing about some of these strengths is you only find them when you're in situations where you need them. So if you hear in your mind, you know, the voice that says, I can't do this, I'm not up to this, I'm not the sort of person who can do this is beyond me, I'm never going to be able to deal with this. Just think of that idea of the strips in the movie film and say, okay, this is how I am at the beginning. And if you notice really good adventure stories, the characters grow in strength and power throughout the story. You can think of yourself in the same way, that when you find something that you're really scrunched up against something, or you're down in that pit, and say, okay, This is my point of growth. And I've done this process with huge numbers of people in lots of different situations, and quite often people come up to me afterwards and they say, the strengths I most value in myself have been ones that I've found in the times that were most difficult. And what happens there is that's an idea of post-traumatic growth. It's an idea of crisis as a turning point, that one of the ways that crisis becomes a turning point is when you discover qualities in yourself that you didn't know were there before. So what I'm kind of inviting here is more of a sense of openness, and if you kind of find yourself hearing the voice that says, oh, that's beyond me, I'm not sure if I can cope, say, well, maybe, and maybe I can surprise myself. Just that expression, maybe I can surprise myself, is a strategy. So those are strengths. Now resources, and when we talk about resources, often people talk about resources in terms of money, in terms of houses, in terms of oil supplies. But I also really like the idea of non-material resources. And I'd say enthusiasm is a non-material resource, but I'd also say good relationships, community. Those are essential resources that make a difference to our resilience. And this is where resilience isn't just a personal thing, it's also a collective thing. That when you're going through a period of difficulty and you've got a well-functioning family, group, organisation, community around you, that's something that adds another layer of protection. So these in terms of resources, restorative environments I want to include in there as well. There's some great work showing that prisoners who have a view looking out onto green scenery have better health than people who don't, than prisoners who don't. You know, it being in a hospital, looking out on a window onto green scenery, people get better, require less painkillers, come out of hospital sooner. So in terms of resources, it's not just the people, and I'd also include in there self-help books and CDs, and all of the things that we turn to, but I'd also include those special places and country you know, places, country, parks, and that's why looking after those places are protecting resources, not just because it's nice to walk in trees, but they are resources that support your mental health. I saw this picture, actually, and it's worth stretching. If you can't see the screen properly, it's worth kind of getting up and peering your neck around. I don't know how they did this. I don't know if this is a real tree or clever Photoshop stuff or what. But I put it in because it somehow really symbolises for me that when we talk about mind, mind isn't just in here, but it's also influenced by the context that we're part of. And that, but when we care for what's around us, we are also caring for ourselves. Okay, so that's an insight. That's an insight about connectivity. And insights, that was the I that Miriam reminded me of. And one of the key insights really to take away is that resilience is learnable. You can strengthen your resistance to depression by learning skills. But also that there's different levels of resilience, as well as your personal resilience. It's supported by the resilience of the communities that you're part of. And I love that saying, they say it a lot in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, I can't, we can. And what that is, it's a reminder that when you're really struggling, how important it is to reach out beyond yourself.